I'd never thought I'd hear my stepson accuse me of something so dangerous, until I did. "I think she cut my brakes," he said, and in that moment, everything changed. What I did next? Let's just say he got the shock of his life. This is a story of family betrayal, calculated revenge, and shocking consequences, and it all started with one careless comment that no one saw coming. The house was unusually quiet that night, almost too quiet. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the nagging tension I'd felt all week. And then I heard it. "I think she cut my brakes," my stepson muttered carelessly, laughing as if it were the most normal thing in the world. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I froze, thinking I had misheard. But as the words sank in, the blood drained from my face. He wasn't joking. He was daring me, or maybe testing how far he could push. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping the edge of the couch, letting the words echo through my mind. Every fiber in my body screamed that this was dangerous, not just for me, but for everyone who trusted him behind the wheel. I couldn't confront him directly, not yet. It had to be calculated, precise, and most importantly, it had to teach a lesson that no one would forget. I paced the living room, thinking through every detail. The plan started to take shape. I would tow his car to his dad's family property, the very people who had indulged his reckless behavior for years. They needed to see, to feel the consequences of ignoring him. I grabbed my gloves and flashlight. My mind was racing, imagining the shock on their faces, the chaos that would ensue, and the lesson my stepson would learn. Every step toward the driveway was tense. The gravel crunched under my shoes, the cold night air bit at my skin, and every shadow seemed like it was watching. I crouched beside the car, inspecting it carefully, planning my moves. This was revenge in its quiet, patient form. One wrong move and it could all backfire, but I had calculated every possibility. As I hooked the car to the tow truck, I took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. The night, the family, and my stepson were all about to learn that actions have consequences, and some lessons are unforgettable. The night was still, but the air was thick with tension. I drove the tow truck carefully, every turn calculated, every shadow examined. In the rearview mirror, I could see my stepson's car, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The family's house came into view. Their lights were on, a soft glow illuminating the perfectly manicured garden. I parked the tow truck just outside the driveway, heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. Inside the house, voices were muted. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, and casual conversation, all oblivious to the storm approaching. I slowly backed the car into the driveway. Each wheel scraping slightly on the gravel sounded like a drumbeat in the silence of the night. And then I noticed movement inside. Someone at the window had spotted the car. The reaction was immediate. Confusion flashed across the faces peering out. Whispers started. Questions were asked. Whose car is that? Why is it here? I stepped back, letting the scene unfold. The suspense was delicious. My stepson's face appeared at the window, and the moment our eyes met, I could see the panic begin to rise. His confident, careless smirk faltered, replaced by fear. He ran to the driveway, still too late to prevent the inevitable confrontation. What is this?" he stammered, voice shaking. I didn't answer. I simply watched as the realization sank in. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a lesson delivered in full view of everyone who had ignored his reckless behavior. The dad's family soon joined him outside, murmuring and pointing. The shock on their faces was priceless. They had indulged him for years, always defending, always excusing, and now they were forced to see the consequences. My stepson tried to explain, to lie, to play innocent, but the proof was right there. His car, towed without warning, sitting as a silent testament to his recklessness. I remained calm, letting them stew in the tension. This was the first wave of the storm, and I knew the night had only just begun. The driveway was now a stage. My stepson stood frozen, his eyes darting between the car, me, and his father's family. Panic was etched into every line of his face. He tried to speak, but the words stumbled out in a nervous jumble. This isn't funny," he said, voice trembling. "I didn't do anything." "Really?" I said calmly, stepping closer, letting my presence dominate the scene. because your own words told a different story." A hush fell over the group. All eyes turned toward him, expectant and judgmental. Whispers began spreading. "Did she really? He said she what?" The tension was unbearable. I could see his bravado crumbling as the weight of the moment sank in. He was no longer the untouchable kid who had laughed at rules and consequences. He was exposed, vulnerable, and terrified. Then, a subtle shift happened. The father, who had always defended his son without question, stepped forward. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, voice rising. I didn't flinch. I repeated, slowly and deliberately, "Your son admitted he thought I cut his brakes, and now he's about to learn what recklessness really costs." At that moment, something unexpected happened. A hidden tension, one that had been simmering under the surface for years, began to unravel. A cousin spoke up, quietly at first. "Maybe he's always been careless. Maybe we've all ignored it too long." The words hit like lightning. The dad's face flushed red with guilt and surprise. Accusations began to bounce across the group. Secrets, small grievances, old frustrations, all the things that had been buried behind polite smiles and excuses, surfaced in rapid succession. My stepson's eyes widened as he realized something terrifying. The family he thought would always protect him was now questioning him. The power he had wielded for so long was gone, replaced by scrutiny, doubt, and judgment. I watched silently, letting the scene play out. This was the exact moment I wanted, hearing his arrogance break down, seeing the consequences of words and actions unfold in front of everyone who had allowed his behavior to go unchecked. And even as he stammered and tried to explain himself, I knew the night was far from over. The real lesson, the part that would leave him shaken for years, was still ahead. My stepson's panic was now tangible. He stumbled back, eyes wide, voice cracking. "Wait, you can't do this. This isn't fair." "Fair." I let out a slow breath. "Fair," I repeated, voice calm, almost chilling. "You think reckless behavior has no consequences? Tonight, you're going to understand exactly what that means." He looked around, hoping for support, but the very people who had spoiled him, his dad, relatives, cousins, were now staring with judgment. Their disappointment burned hotter than any anger I could show. You brought it here?" he whispered, a tremor in his voice. "Why would you—" "Because actions have consequences," I interrupted, "and when no one else enforces them, someone has to." His knees weakened. He sank slightly to the ground, unable to comprehend the reality hitting him. The car, sitting there silently, was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol of every careless decision, every lie, every disrespectful word he had ever said. I didn't mean," he tried to stammer, but no one was listening. The tension was thick. The night seemed to press down on him from all sides. And then came the first real emotional blow. His father, usually protective, stepped forward. "You've been reckless for too long," he said, voice heavy. "We thought we were teaching you patience and responsibility, but clearly, lessons alone weren't enough." The words hit him like a hammer. His arrogance cracked completely. Tears welled up. But it wasn't just fear. It was the bitter realization that every excuse, every lie, every reckless thrill he enjoyed had just caught up to him. I stood back, letting the moment breathe. This was the first stage of his punishment: humiliation, regret, and awareness. But this was only the beginning. The full weight of the night, the revenge, and the lesson was still unfolding. Every flicker of fear, every trembling word, every broken expression was a confirmation that my plan was working exactly as I had envisioned. The stepson who laughed at rules was disappearing before my eyes, replaced by someone who might finally understand consequences. The night air was thick with tension. Every move my stepson made was calculated, yet trembling with fear. He tried to regain composure, to act as if nothing was wrong,
but every glance toward the car reminded him of the trap he had walked into. I decided it was time to escalate, small, deliberate actions to teach lessons without immediate confrontation. I left subtle notes on the car. Think before you act. I made sure his belongings in the driveway were slightly rearranged, enough to make him uneasy but not fully aggressive. His reaction was immediate. Eyes darting around, face pale, hands shaking. What did you do?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Family members began murmuring, "Why is he acting so strange? Something's off." The tension grew, and suddenly the father looked at his son differently. The indulgent, carefree boy they had spoiled was cracking under pressure. My stepson tried to talk, tried to lie, tried to convince everyone that he had no idea what was happening, but the psychological pressure was already working. His panic became more apparent with each passing minute, every flicker of doubt from the family making him shrink further. I watched quietly, letting fear, regret, and shame slowly settle in. He was learning, step by step, that recklessness had a price, and that family indulgence alone couldn't save him anymore. Even as he searched for excuses, I kept a calm, almost cold presence. The night wasn't about yelling or physical punishment. It was about letting the weight of consequences settle in. The emotional tension was the first real strike of revenge. By the time the father stepped forward again, the atmosphere had shifted. He addressed his son, voice steady but firm. "Perhaps now you understand that every reckless act has consequences. Perhaps now you understand why rules exist." My stepson's eyes filled with tears, not just fear, but the realization of years of indulgence finally catching up to him. And I knew this was just the beginning.
By now, my stepson was visibly desperate. Every second he spent in the driveway increased his anxiety. His mind raced, searching for a way to regain control, to turn the situation in his favor. He tried sneaky tactics, moving items in the yard, whispering excuses to relatives, even pretending he hadn't said a word about the brakes, but nothing worked. Every attempt to manipulate backfired. The father's eyes were sharp, watching closely. The cousins and other family members were no longer just bystanders. They were observers of his unraveling arrogance. Each lie he tried to spin only made him look weaker, smaller, more cornered. He snapped at one cousin who laughed quietly. "It's not what you think." But the words sounded hollow. No one believed him anymore. The panic in his eyes betrayed the lies. I stayed calm, silent, letting his desperate behavior unfold. Each small failure, each stammering explanation built the psychological pressure. Fear, guilt, and shame now controlled him. Suddenly, he tried a more daring move. He reached for his phone, planning to call someone for help or to shift the blame. But in his haste, he dropped it. The phone skidded across the gravel, a loud metallic clatter that made everyone flinch. His father's voice cut sharply through the tension. "Enough. You've been reckless for too long, and now it's time to face the consequences, fully." The stepson froze. His mind screamed for a way out, but there was none. Every trick he had tried had failed spectacularly. The house, the family, even the night itself seemed to close in around him. I realized then, the psychological trap was fully set. He was broken, not physically, but mentally. Every careless action, every moment of arrogance was finally catching up. And the real lesson, the part he would never forget, was only beginning. The night was thick with unease. My stepson was no longer just panicking. He was cornered, desperate, and trembling. But as I watched, another layer of tension began to unfold. The family's own secrets. A cousin who had always seemed quiet and neutral suddenly spoke up. "Maybe he's not the only one making mistakes. Maybe some of us ignored things too long." The words hit the group like a spark to dry tinder. Eyes widened. Whispered accusations started flying. Old grudges, small betrayals, and long-forgotten arguments resurfaced. The family who had always presented a united front now looked fractured. The father's face turned red, not with anger this time, but with guilt.
I never realized how much I protected him from everything, he admitted, voice shaking. Maybe I let him think he was untouchable. My stepson froze, eyes wide. For the first time, he realized the consequences, not just his actions, but the family's indulgence over the years. His arrogance was gone, replaced by fear and regret. I remained calm, observing. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the full psychological impact of revenge, not just on him, but on everyone who had allowed his recklessness to flourish. Another family member chimed in, voice low but cutting. And what about all the times we made excuses for him, all the warnings ignored? We're partly responsible too. The stepson's shoulders slumped. The weight of years of indulgence, lies, and ignored rules was now crushing him. No amount of begging or excuses could undo the growing tension. I took a slow step forward. Sometimes, I said, voice calm but sharp, people don't realize the consequences of their actions until someone makes them face it, fully. A heavy silence fell. The family's past mistakes, hidden grudges, and misjudgments were now laid bare. My stepson was no longer a reckless boy. He was a cornered young man forced to see the reality he had ignored for so long. The night wasn't over yet. The real climax, the ultimate lesson of this revenge, was still ahead. But this moment had changed everything.
By now, the night had become a pressure cooker of emotions. My stepson's panic had reached its peak. Every whispered excuse, every pleading look, every desperate attempt to shift blame had failed spectacularly. I stepped closer, letting my presence dominate the scene. "Do you finally understand?" I asked calmly, voice cold yet steady. "This is what happens when recklessness and arrogance are ignored for too long." He tried to respond, stammering, I didn't mean it was a joke." But the family's faces told him the truth. No one believed him anymore. His father, who had once shielded him from every consequence, now looked at him with disappointment and anger. "You thought you could act without consequences," the father said, voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You thought we would always cover for you, but tonight you face the results of your actions, and everyone is watching." Tears ran down my stepson's face, a mix of fear, guilt, and shock. The realization that years of indulgence and carelessness had finally caught up with him was devastating. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The emotional weight of the moment was enough. Every glance from the family, every whispered comment, every judgmental stare served as punishment. And then came the final strike. I pointed towards his car, the silent symbol of every reckless act he had ever taken. "This isn't just a car," I said slowly. "It's a reminder. A reminder that no action is without consequence. And tonight, you've learned that the hard way." The stepson fell to his knees, fully overwhelmed. The arrogance that had defined him was gone. Panic, shame, and regret had replaced it. The family's murmurs grew louder, voices layered with realization, guilt, and anger at the past mistakes they had allowed. This was the emotional climax, the point where every thread of tension, every calculated move, every psychological strike converged. My revenge had reached its peak. And yet, the night wasn't completely over. There was still one final layer, the lesson that will ensure he never forgets what he had done and what he had caused.
The chaos of confrontation had subsided, but the emotional tension remained thick in the air. My stepson sat on the driveway, knees drawn up, staring blankly at the gravel beneath him. The weight of the night pressed down like a physical force. No one spoke at first. The family watched quietly, absorbing the impact of what had just happened. For the first time, the father's protective instincts had faltered, replaced with reflection and guilt. You've been reckless for years," the father finally admitted, voice heavy. "And I allowed it. I excused it. I thought I was protecting you, but in reality, I enabled you." The stepson flinched, realizing that his mistakes were no longer his alone. The indulgence of the family, their excuses and lack of boundaries, had fueled his recklessness. I stepped closer, still calm, letting the silence speak louder than words. "This night isn't just about punishment," I said softly. It's about awareness, about understanding that actions, no matter how small, have consequences. His eyes lifted, filled with guilt and fear. I didn't realize, he whispered, voice clacking. You did now, I replied. And that realization, that understanding, is worth more than any lecture or shouting ever could have given you. Around us, the family murmured among themselves. The realization hit them too. Indulgence without accountability only creates bigger problems. Secrets, past mistakes, and overlooked behavior had now culminated in this shocking lesson. My stepson's panic had subsided slightly, replaced by introspection and regret. He finally understood the weight of his arrogance. And in that silence, the first seeds of true change were planted.
The night that had begun with chaos, panic, and tension was finally coming to an end. My stepson stood slowly, shoulders slumped, eyes filled with remorse. The weight of the lesson was fully upon him, and there was no way to avoid it this time. He looked at me, his voice barely a whisper. I understand now. I was reckless. I didn't think. I didn't realize how far it could go. I nodded quietly. Now you do. And that understanding, that awareness, is what will change everything going forward. His father stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. We all played a role in this, he admitted. We made excuses, we overlooked mistakes, we allowed carelessness to grow. But tonight, you faced the truth, and so did we. Let this be the turning point. The family stood together in reflective silence. The tension that had dominated the night slowly dissipated, replaced by a somber understanding. My stepson had learned the harsh reality of consequences, and the family had learned the dangers of indulgence and neglect. I took a final look at the car, the symbol of recklessness and lessons learned. It had served its purpose perfectly, not as a weapon of anger, but as a mirror, reflecting the truth back to everyone involved. As the first light of dawn touched the driveway, there was a quiet calm. No words were needed. The revenge was complete, not through violence or anger, but through calculated strategy, patience, and emotional truth. My stepson had changed. The family had changed. And in the silence, one thing was clear. Actions have consequences, and lessons learned the hard way are never forgotten.